am Chloe, 35 years old, and my family treats me like the hired help. 2 days before Christmas, my mother dropped a guest list on my kitchen counter and ordered me to prep prime rib and clean the guest suites for my sister's husband's billionaire boss. She looked me up and down and told me to stay hidden in the kitchen so I would not embarrass them. I did not argue. I just smiled, threw the list in the trash the second she turned her back, and texted my pilot to prep my private jet for Palm Beach. What they did not know was that the billionaire CEO they were desperately trying to impress worked directly for me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. It was the morning of December 23rd when the doorbell of my Atlanta home rang. I opened it to find my mother, Vivian, standing on my porch wrapped in a cashmere coat, looking as though simply stepping foot on my property was a massive inconvenience. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was doing. She simply marched past me into my kitchen, dropping her designer handbag on my granite island with a heavy thud. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and slid it across the counter toward me. "Jada and Preston are hosting a VIP dinner tomorrow night for Christmas Eve," she announced, her voice echoing in my quiet house. "Jada's friends and Preston's corporate colleagues are coming. It is only 30 people. I need you to handle the prime rib, the side dishes, and make sure the guest suites at their house are spotless before anyone arrives." I stared at the piece of paper, then up at the woman who gave birth to me. My own mother was standing in my home handing me a chore list as if I were a catering service she had hired for the holidays. But she was not finished. "Stilling Pierce is coming," she said, leaning in closer, her eyes wide with a manic kind of social desperation. "He is Preston's CEO. The man is old money luxury. Preston is next in line for a massive promotion, and this dinner needs to be flawless. So, I need you to cook and clean, but I also need you to stay out of sight. You are to remain in the kitchen the entire evening. We simply cannot have you mingling with these people. You are 35, single, and smelling like garlic and roasting meat. We cannot have you ruining Preston's image with your awkwardness. Do not embarrass us, Chloe." She delivered this devastating insult with the casual ease of someone discussing the weather. To her, this was not cruel. It was simply the natural order of things. I was the disappointment, the spinster daughter, who supposedly ran a little event planning hobby, while my sister Jada was the glowing success. I looked at my mother. I felt the familiar sting of rejection trying to claw its way up my throat, but I forced it back down. Years of practice had taught me how to bury the hurt. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply gave her a polite, empty smile. "Understood, Mom," I said quietly. "I will take care of it." She nodded, looking satisfied with my submission. "See that you do," she replied, snapping her purse shut. "Preston's career depends on this." She turned on her heel and walked out the front door without another backward glance. The moment I heard her car pull out of the driveway, I picked up the guest list and dropped it straight into the trash can. Then I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to my aviation team. "Prep the jet. I am heading to Palm Beach early." To understand how my family reached this level of absolute audacity, you have to understand the toxic hierarchy that governed our lives. Growing up in an affluent African-American household in Atlanta, image was the only currency that mattered to my parents. My father, Roland, and my mother, Vivian, cared about the country club, the Sunday church service appearances, and making sure everyone in our social circle knew how successful they were. My sister Jada was exactly 3 years younger than me, and she was the undisputed golden child. She played their game flawlessly. She was beautiful, charismatic, and completely obsessed with status. Her ultimate victory in my parents' eyes was her marriage. Jada married Preston. He was 34, white, arrogant, and a vice president at a massive private equity firm. To my parents, Preston was the holy grail. He represented proximity to wealth, corporate power, and a specific kind of elite networking they desperately craved. They treated him like royalty. By contrast, I was the family failure because I did not marry a doctor or a lawyer, because I did not flaunt designer labels or boast about my income at family dinners. They assumed I was struggling. They viewed my life as a cautionary tale. I let them believe it. I kept my head down, worked relentlessly, and kept my business affairs completely hidden from their prying eyes and endless judgment. The disrespect had been building for years, but it reached a boiling point just a few weeks prior during Thanksgiving dinner. We were all sitting around my parents' lavish dining room table. Preston was holding court, talking loudly about his firm and his brilliant investment strategies. I was sitting quietly at the end of the table, trying to eat my meal in peace. Suddenly, Preston held up his empty bourbon glass. He did not ask for a refill. He did not say, "Excuse me." He looked directly at me and snapped his fingers. Literally snapped his fingers in my face like I was a servant in a tavern. "Chloe, be a dear and top this off," he commanded, a smug grin playing on his lips. "Sterling Pierce is going to be visiting Atlanta for the holidays, and I need to practice my hosting skills. The man is a billionaire, and when he makes me senior partner, I am going to need someone to pour my drinks." The entire table went dead silent. I sat frozen, the humiliation burning in my chest like a physical fire. I looked at my sister Jada, hoping she would tell her husband he had crossed a line. She just took a sip of her wine and looked away. I turned my gaze to my father. I was giving Roland one last chance to defend his flesh and blood, to be a father to me. Instead, my father slammed his hand on the mahogany table, making the silverware rattle. "Serve quietly, Chloe," he barked, his voice harsh and unforgiving. "Preston is carrying the legacy of this family forward. You need to do your part and stop acting so sensitive. Go get the man his drink." I stood up, took his glass, and walked to the kitchen. I poured the bourbon. I walked back and set it down. I swallowed my pride because I knew something they did not. The reason I never argued back, the reason I let them treat me like the help, was not because I lacked a spine. It was because arguing is a tactic for people who lack leverage. You do not need to raise your voice when you hold all the cards. My family was living in a shallow fantasy world of country club gossip and corporate climbing. But I owned the reality. 5 years ago, I took my meager savings and started a boutique luxury hospitality group. I catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy, creating high-end private retreats for corporate executives. I worked 20-hour days, sacrificing everything to build a flawless reputation. The cash flow from that business was massive, and I aggressively reinvested every single dime. Over time, my hospitality group evolved. I hired top-tier financial analysts and transitioned my capital into aggressive investments. I built an elite private equity firm from the ground up, naming it Apex Zenith. I deliberately kept my name out of the public eye, operating through holding companies and trusted executives. I preferred moving in silence, letting my money make the noise while I remained invisible. My parents thought I was baking cupcakes and organizing small local parties. They had no idea I controlled a multi-billion-dollar investment portfolio, but the absolute best part, the secret that kept me smiling every time Preston opened his arrogant mouth, was the massive acquisition Apex Zenith had just finalized. We had aggressively bought out our competitors and seized a 60% majority stake in Preston's firm. We completely took over the board. That meant Sterling Pierce, the legendary billionaire CEO that Preston practically worshipped, the man my family was currently treating me like a maid to impress, was not the top of the food chain. Sterling Pierce reported directly to me. I was his boss. As I packed my designer luggage for my flight to Florida, I could not help but laugh. My mother wanted me to stay hidden in the kitchen so I would not embarrass Preston in front of the CEO. I zipped my bag shut and grabbed my sunglasses. I was not going to be in the kitchen. I was not going to be in Atlanta at all. I was leaving them with an empty fridge, a dirty house, and their own inflated egos. Let Preston impress his boss on his own. I had a corporate summit to run. I had barely zipped my overnight bag when the front door swung open again. They did not even bother to knock. Footsteps echoed in the foyer, followed by my sister Jada's shrill voice, complaining about the morning traffic. Preston trailed behind her, looking entirely too smug for a man wearing a wrinkled dress shirt. My mother, Vivian, was right on their heels, having apparently waited in her car for them to arrive. They marched into my living room like an invading army. Preston tossed a plastic-wrapped bundle onto my pristine velvet sofa. "There is my dry cleaning," he announced, not making eye contact. "I need the navy suit pressed by 4. Do not burn the lapels this time." Sterling Pierce notices details. Jada ran a manicured finger over my kitchen counter, checking for dust. "Are you even prepped yet? Chloe, Preston's boss, is practically royalty. We cannot have you serving him something basic. It is just a little cooking hobby for her babe." Preston chuckled, leaning against the granite island. "But she better step it up tonight. I am one signature away from senior partner, and if the food is dry, it reflects poorly on me." Vivian stepped forward, her eyes scanning me with utter disdain. "Sterling Pierce is old money," she stated, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. He is accustomed to Michelin star service. We absolutely cannot have a 3-5-year-old single woman who smells like garlic in desperation, ruining the aesthetic of the evening. You will stay in the kitchen the entire night. If you need to bring out the platters, use the service entrance to the dining room. Do not speak to him. Do not try to network. You do not belong in that world. The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. I turned my gaze slowly from my mother to my father, Roland, who had just strolled in carrying a box of expensive cigars for Preston. I looked Roland dead in the eye. I was giving him one final chance to be a father, one last opportunity to look at his eldest daughter and defend her dignity in her own home. Roland caught my gaze. He scoffed, setting the cigars down next to Preston. Listen to your mother, Chloe. Just be useful for once in your life. Your sister secured a real man, and you need to support this family's elevation. That was it. The final thread binding me to this toxic dynamic snapped clean and absolute. I felt no rage, no sorrow, only the cold, hard clarity of a predator watching its prey walk willingly into a trap. I smiled. It was my most polished, polite corporate smile. Of course, I said smoothly. I will handle everything exactly as you deserve. Satisfied with my submission, Vivian clapped her hands together. Excellent. We are heading to the country club for a pre-dinner brunch. We will be back at 5 to get dressed. See that the house is spotless by then. They swept out of my house just as quickly as they had entered, completely oblivious to the disaster they had just secured for themselves. The moment their luxury SUV disappeared down the street, I went into action. I grabbed Preston's dry cleaning off the sofa, walked over to the trash can, and shoved the entire plastic-wrapped bundle inside. I opened my refrigerator and began emptying it. Every ounce of prime rib, every vegetable, every expensive cheese my mother had dropped off earlier went straight into heavy-duty garbage bags. I carried them out to the dumpster in the garage. I left the refrigerator completely barren, sparkling clean, and entirely devoid of food. I grabbed a bright pink sticky note, grabbed a pen, and wrote a single line. Try Uber Eats. I slapped the note right in the center of the kitchen island. I grabbed my luggage, locked my front door, and climbed into the sleek black town car my security team had waiting in the driveway. Within 40 minutes, I was walking up the steps of my private Gulfstream jet. As the engines roared to life and we ascended into the clouds toward Palm Beach, I settled into my leather seat and opened my phone. A text notification popped up on my encrypted corporate line. It was from Sterling Pierce. Looking forward to the Florida Summit, boss. I am dropping by a VP's house in Atlanta tonight out of sheer obligation, but I am keeping it short. I will fly straight to your resort immediately after. I smiled, sipping my sparkling water. Safe travels, Sterling. I have a feeling your dinner will be unforgettable. I arrived at my private estate in Palm Beach by early afternoon. I spent the next few hours relaxing on my yacht marina, reviewing the board documents for the upcoming Apex Zenith corporate retreat, and enjoying the warm Florida sun. I did not give my family a second thought until the clock struck 6. My phone began to vibrate violently. The notifications rolled in like rapid-fire artillery. I picked up the device and watched the chaos unfold in real time. There were 5 missed calls from Vivian, 7 from Jada, a frantic voicemail notification. I tapped play and put it on speaker. Chloe Vivian's voice shrieked through the phone, practically hyperventilating. Where are you? Where is the food? The fridge is empty. Where is Preston's suit? Sterling Pierce is going to be here in exactly 1 hour, and there is nothing but a sticky note on the counter. Get back here right now. A text from Jada came through a second later. Preston's boss is arriving. Fix this immediately or I swear to God I will ruin you. I leaned back against the plush cushions of the yacht deck. The Florida sunset was painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. I raised my champagne glass to the horizon, snapped a flawless selfie, and attached it to the family group chat. I am on vacation, I typed, hitting send. You wanted to impress him? Impress him. I watched the read receipts pop up. I could practically feel the panic attack seizing my mother's chest through the cellular network. I switched my phone to Do Not Disturb, set the device face down on the table, and took a long, satisfying sip of my drink. Let the games begin. I let my phone sit silent for 2 full hours. When I finally picked it up, the screen was a battlefield of missed calls and frantic text messages. I poured myself another glass of champagne, connected my wireless earbuds, and decided to listen to the voicemails. It was better than any movie. I could hear the exact timeline of their spectacular failure unfolding in high-defin audio. The first voicemail was from Jada, time-stamped at 6:55. Sterling Pierce was a man known in the corporate world for his ruthless punctuality. If a meeting was at 7, he was walking through the door at 6:59. In the background of Jada's message, I could hear the frantic clanking of silverware and my mother barking orders. Jada was hissing into the phone, demanding I order a private catering service to replace the food I had thrown away. She sounded like she was on the verge of a panic attack. I knew exactly what was happening. They had walked into my pristine, empty house, expecting a servant to be waiting on them hand and foot. Instead, they found a barren kitchen and a sticky note. By 7:15, the voicemails had shifted from demanding to desperate. My father left a message next. His voice lacked its usual booming authority. He sounded small and panicked, telling me to answer the phone because they had to order from a local chain restaurant and the delivery driver was lost. I could picture it perfectly. The great Vivian forced to scrape lukewarm mashed potatoes and soggy fried chicken out of styrofoam containers onto her pristine imported china. Sterling Pierce was a man of refined tastes. Serving him cold takeout in a dining room that smelled of panic and cheap cooking oil was the ultimate social suicide for a family obsessed with image. I received a text from Preston around 8. It was a massive paragraph filled with spelling errors. He was furious. He told me I had ruined his life and that he was currently trying to explain to his billionaire boss why the dinner was a disaster. According to a subsequent tearful voicemail from my mother, Preston had resorted to his absolute favorite defense mechanism. He was blaming me. I knew Sterling Pierce well. He respected accountability above all else. When I acquired his company, we had a long meeting about corporate responsibility and the culture he maintained. He despised executives who passed the buck. I could easily envision the scene in my dining room. Preston sweating through his wrinkled shirt, desperately trying to throw his missing sister-in-law under the bus. I could hear Preston attempting to laugh it off, calling me a lazy, unreliable woman who abandoned her family out of jealousy. He thought belittling me would build a bridge of patriarchal camaraderie with his boss. He thought Sterling would chuckle and agree that the help was always unreliable. He was dead wrong. The final voicemail of the night came from Jada. It was just past 8:45. Sterling had barely stayed 45 minutes. Jada must have forgotten to lock her phone because the voicemail was a pocket dial recording the live audio of my living room. I turned up the volume on my earbuds. Through the static, I could actually hear Sterling speaking in the background. His voice was calm, authoritative, and utterly chilling. He was not shouting, but his words carried the weight of an executioner. I heard Sterling tell Preston that a true leader takes responsibility for his environment. He told my brother-in-law that blaming a family member for his own lack of preparation showed a fundamental flaw in character. Then came the absolute best part of the recording. Sterling excused himself, stating he had a flight to catch to Palm Beach. He told Preston he was meeting the chairwoman of his parent company the next morning. I heard Sterling speak with complete clarity. He said she is a woman of impeccable standards, something this household clearly lacks. I suggest you evaluate your priorities, Preston, because right now, you look incredibly small. The front door clicked shut on the recording, followed by the sound of Jada sobbing and my mother screaming my name. Preston was hyperventilating, repeating over and over that his career was finished. The billionaire he worshipped had just walked out of their house after insulting them to their faces. The social standing my parents valued more than my own happiness had just been pulverized in under an hour. Vivian grabbed the phone from Jada. The audio shifted as she brought the microphone to her mouth, leaving one final deliberate message directly addressing me. She swore she was going to make me pay for destroying their reputation. She declared that they were not going to let this go. Preston had figured out which exclusive resort Sterling was staying at in Palm Beach. Vivian announced that they were packing their bags and driving to Florida immediately. She said they were going to casually run into Sterling at the resort to fix Preston's image, and when they found me, they were going to make me regret the day I was born. I took the earbuds out of my ears and let the ocean breeze wash over me. The sheer delusion required to think they could just drive down to an ultra-exclusive billionaire summit and talk their way out of a catastrophic failure was staggering. But it was exactly what I expected from them. They were coming to Palm Beach. They were going to try to force their way into spaces where they did not belong just to drag me back down to their level. I smiled, leaning back into my lounge chair and looking up at the Florida stars. Let them come. The trap was perfectly set, and they were walking right into the jaws of a corporate empire they could not even begin to comprehend. I went to sleep that night feeling more peaceful than I had in 35 years. The next morning, I woke up early. The air was warm and smelled of salt water and expensive jasmine. I ordered a light breakfast to my suite and took my time getting ready. Today was not just a vacation day. Today was the day I addressed the board of my acquired companies. I stood in front of the full-length mirror and adjusted my outfit. I wore a stunning, custom-tailored white designer suit with gold accents. My hair was perfectly styled, my makeup flawless, and my posture radiated the kind of power that only comes from knowing you own the ground you stand on. I was in my element, powerful, respected, and surrounded by executives who hung on my every word. I gathered my portfolio and walked out of my suite toward the resort's main conference center. My security team was already in position, discreetly blending into the background of the lavish hotel. As I approached the main lobby, my head of security, a towering man named David, stepped into my path and tapped his earpiece. "Boss, we have a situation at the front gates," David said, his tone purely professional. "A family in a rental SUV is causing a disturbance. They do not have reservations, and they are not on the summit guest list. The older woman is screaming at the gate attendant, demanding to be let in. She claims her son-in-law works for Sterling Pierce." I did not break my stride. I just smiled. "Let them through security," I instructed, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "Escort them directly to the main lobby. Do not tell them who authorized their entry. Let them think their aggressive entitlement actually worked." David nodded and relayed the order into his radio. I walked into the grand marble lobby of the resort and took a seat on one of the plush velvet sofas near the center fountain. I crossed my legs, rested my hands on my portfolio, and waited. Less than 10 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of the lobby flew open. My family stormed in, looking absolutely disheveled from driving through the night. Preston was sweating through a golf polo, his face red and frantic. Jada looked exhausted, her designer luggage dragging behind her. My father, Roland, looked irritated, while my mother, Vivian, marched at the front of the pack, her eyes darting around the luxurious space like she was looking for a manager to complain to. It did not take long for Vivian to spot me sitting calmly on the sofa. Her prejudice was so blinding, so deeply ingrained in her psyche, that she did not even register the fact that I was wearing a suit that cost more than her car. She marched straight up to me, pointing a manicured finger in my face. "Are you working the concierge desk now?" Vivian demanded, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "Good. Your little stunt last night almost cost Preston his job. Get up right now and get Preston a meeting room with Sterling Pierce immediately. We know he is staying here." Preston stepped up beside her, snapping his fingers at me just like he had at Thanksgiving. "Fix this, Chloe," he ordered, running a hand over his sweaty face. "Point me to Sterling's suite. Then go out to the rental car and get my bags. You owe us for the embarrassment you caused," Jada chimed in, crossing her arms. "And you better find us a room, too." The front desk said they were completely booked for a private corporate retreat. "Tell them you are staff and get us checked in." I looked at the four of them. They were completely unhinged, standing in one of the most exclusive resorts in the country, barking orders at me as if we were still standing in my kitchen in Atlanta. I did not flinch. I did not yell. I did not shed a single tear. I looked at them with absolute ice. "You are trespassing on my private property," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Before Vivian could open her mouth to scream at me, the heavy mahogany doors of the conference wing opened. Sterling Pierce walked into the lobby, flanked by a team of 6 senior executives. He was dressed in a sharp gray suit, reviewing a financial document as he walked. Preston practically shoved Jada out of the way to intercept him. He sprinted across the lobby, a desperate, overly eager smile plastered on his face. "Sterling," Sir Preston choked out, sweating profusely. "I am so glad I caught you. About last night in Atlanta, I can explain everything. It was a complete understanding with the household help." Sterling did not even break his stride. He did not look at Preston. He did not acknowledge the apology. He walked straight past Preston, leaving my brother-in-law standing in the middle of the floor with his hand extended to empty air. Sterling walked directly toward the velvet sofa where I was sitting. As he approached, he stopped, handed his documents to an assistant, and extended his hand toward me with a deep, respectful nod. "Chloe Sterling," said his voice ringing clear and authoritative across the silent lobby. "Thank you for flying down early. The board is assembled and ready for your opening address, boss." The silence in the lobby was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Jada's jaw actually dropped open. Roland stumbled backward, bumping into a luggage cart. Preston spun around, looking like he had just been physically struck. He looked from Sterling to me and back to Sterling, his brain completely failing to process the reality unfolding in front of him. Boss Preston choked out his voice, cracking into a high-pitched squeak. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my white suit. I looked Preston dead in the eye, my voice echoing in the vast space. Yes, Preston. I am the founder and chairwoman of Apex Zenith, which means I own 60% of your firm. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. And since I expect absolute accountability from my leadership, something you clearly lack as of this exact moment, you are fired. Preston collapsed internally, his knees visibly shaking. Jada burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. Vivian, completely shattered by the destruction of her entire social universe, tried to backtrack desperately. Her tone switched instantly from demanding to sickeningly sweet. Chloe, baby. Vivian stammered, reaching out a trembling hand toward me. We had no idea. We are family. We always knew you were special. We are so proud of you. I held up a single hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. I am not your baby, I said, my words dropping like anvils. I am the maid you tried to force into the kitchen. I turned my head and gave David a slight nod. Security, I commanded. Escort these unauthorized individuals off my property. I turned my back on them, taking Sterling's arm and walking toward the boardroom. I did not look back, even as Vivian screamed my name and Preston begged for his job, while the security team physically dragged them out the front doors. 6 months later, my life was exactly where it belonged. Preston was unemployed and completely unhireable in the financial sector after the news of his termination spread. Jada deleted all her social media accounts, unable to face the embarrassment. My parents' social standing in Atlanta was entirely ruined after the truth leaked to their entire country club. I was sitting on my yacht, thriving in absolute peace. Blood makes you related, but respect makes you family. The moment the heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind them, I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. The silence in my house was absolute. Through the front window, I watched Preston's luxury SUV back out of my driveway and disappear down the tree-lined street, heading toward their exclusive country club brunch. They were laughing. I was sure of it. They were clinking mimosas and celebrating their upward mobility, entirely convinced that the quiet spinster sister was back at the house scrubbing floors and seasoning meat. The sheer audacity of their delusion was almost impressive. I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream into a pillow. Crying is for people who lack options, and I had more options than anyone else in my bloodline. I walked into the center of my living room and stared at the plastic-wrapped bundle Preston had carelessly tossed onto my custom velvet sofa, his navy blue suit, the armor he planned to wear to impress the billionaire he worshipped. I picked it up by the plastic hanger. It felt light, flimsy, almost pathetic. He actually expected me to press his clothes like a 1950s domestic worker. I dragged the suit across the hardwood floor, walked straight into the kitchen, and shoved the entire bundle into the stainless steel trash can. It did not fit perfectly, so I used the heel of my shoe to stomp it down, crushing the lapels he was so worried about. I poured the remaining half of my morning dark roast coffee directly over the plastic, just to ensure the fabric was completely ruined. Preston wanted me to handle his dry cleaning. Consider it handled. Next, I turned my attention to the massive double-door refrigerator. My mother had stocked it to the brim the day before using my father's credit card. She had brought in a massive dry-aged prime rib artisan cheeses, imported caviar, and organic vegetables. She expected me to spend the next 8 hours standing over a hot stove, meticulously preparing a Michelin star quality meal so she could take the credit and Preston could secure his promotion. I opened the heavy refrigerator doors and pulled out a roll of heavy-duty industrial black trash bags. I started with the prime rib. I grabbed the expensive cut of meat and dropped it into the bag with a heavy thud. Next went the cheeses, the caviar, the organic asparagus, the heavy cream, and the expensive bottles of wine they intended to serve. I was methodical and completely ruthless. I did not leave a single egg, a single stick of butter, or a single bottle of sparkling water. I emptied the pantry too, tossing the imported crackers, the truffle oil, and the specialty spices. I bagged it all up, tied the heavy plastic in tight knots, and dragged the bags out to the dumpster in my garage. When I was finished, I returned to the kitchen and wiped down the glass shelves until they sparkled. The refrigerator was entirely barren, a glowing, empty cavern of absolutely nothing. I walked over to my desk drawer and pulled out a bright pink sticky note and a black marker. I wrote 3 simple words. Try Uber Eats. I walked over to the massive granite kitchen island and stuck the bright pink note dead center. It was the only object in the entire kitchen. The visual contrast was stunning. A sprawling luxury kitchen, completely devoid of anything edible, with a single neon sign of their impending doom waiting to greet them. With the kitchen handled, I walked upstairs to my master suite to pack. My mother always preferred it when I wore oversized drab sweaters and sensible shoes. It fit her narrative of the unappealing single daughter, but the woman packing this designer luggage was the chairwoman of Apex Zenith. I pulled out my authentic tailored power suits, silk blouses from Milan, and a pair of red bottom heels that commanded respect the second they hit a boardroom floor. I packed my jewelry case with diamonds I had bought for myself with my own dividends. I was not packing for a family holiday. I was packing for a corporate summit where I was the highest authority in the room. I zipped up my luggage just as my phone buzzed with a text from my personal security detail. The town car was waiting in the driveway. I locked the front door of my house, set the alarm, and climbed into the back of the sleek black car. The tinted windows shielded me from the suburban neighborhood as we merged onto the highway, heading straight for the private aviation terminal. I bypassed the chaotic holiday crowds at the commercial airport. My security team escorted me directly onto the tarmac where my private Gulfstream jet was waiting, fueled and ready. The flight attendant, Elias, stood at the top of the stairs with a warm professional smile. "Welcome back, boss," Elias said, taking my coat as I stepped into the luxurious cabin. "We are cleared for takeoff to Palm Beach whenever you are ready." I settled into my plush leather seat, stretching my legs out. Elias handed me a crystal flute of aged champagne. I took a sip, feeling the crisp bubbles hit my tongue as the jet engines roared to life. We taxied down the runway, and within minutes, we were ascending into the clouds, leaving the toxic hierarchy of Atlanta far below me. Once we reached cruising altitude, I pulled out my secure encrypted tablet. I needed to review the final board documents regarding the aggressive acquisition of Preston's private equity firm. The ink was dry, the shares were transferred, and my absolute control over his company was legally binding. Just as I was pulling up the executive restructuring plans, my private cellular line buzzed with a new text message. Very few people had this number. I opened the notification. It was from Sterling Pierce, the billionaire CEO of Preston's firm, and as of last week, my direct subordinate. The text read, "Looking forward to the Florida summit, boss. I have to drop by a desperate vice president's dinner in Atlanta out of sheer obligation first. The guy is practically begging for a promotion, but I am keeping it to under an hour. I will fly straight to your resort immediately after." I stared at the screen, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. Preston had no idea that the man he was treating like a god was groveling to me in my text messages. Sterling hated sycophants, and he despised executives who lacked composure. I knew exactly what Sterling was going to walk into tonight. He was going to walk into a house that smelled like stale coffee and panic. He was going to find a desperate vice president, sweating through a ruined suit, and a kitchen with absolutely nothing to serve but a pink sticky note. I typed my response carefully. "Safe travels, Sterling. I have a feeling your dinner tonight will be unforgettable. See you in Palm Beach." I locked my phone, set it on the polished wood table next to my champagne, and looked out the window at the endless blue sky. My mother had wanted me to be useful. I was being incredibly useful. I was teaching them a lesson they would never forget. The Gulfstream touched down on the sun-baked tarmac in Palm Beach perfectly on schedule. The transition from the cold, toxic environment of Atlanta to the breezy, opulent reality of my life in Florida was sharp and immediate. I stepped off the jet and into the waiting luxury SUV, which whisked me directly to the private marina. The Zenith, my 3-story super yacht, was gleaming in the late afternoon sun. I boarded the vessel, shedding my restrictive travel blazer for a lightweight silk resort dress that caught the warm ocean breeze. My staff handed me a perfectly mixed cocktail. I walked to the upper deck, sinking into a plush lounger. I checked my diamond-encrusted watch. It was exactly 558 inches the evening. Back in Atlanta, the pre-dinner country club brunch had just ended. My parents, my golden child sister, and her arrogant husband were currently pulling into my driveway. I could picture the scene vividly. Vivian was likely barking last-minute commands, fixing her hair in the rearview mirror, fully expecting to walk into a house, smelling of roasted garlic, rosemary, and slow-cooked prime rib. Preston was probably marching to the front door, expecting his freshly pressed navy suit to be hanging perfectly on the garment rack. They expected a maid. They expected complete submission. At precisely 6, my phone began to vibrate against the teakwood table. It did not just ring, it convulsed. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications that looked like a digital panic attack. 5 missed calls from Vivian, 8 from Jada. A dozen text messages flooded in so fast the screen could not even scroll properly to display them all. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink, savoring the crisp citrus notes, and tapped the first voicemail. Vivian's voice blasted through the speaker. She started off annoyed, her tone laced with that familiar, condescending edge. "Chloe, where are you?" The front door was locked. "Why is the house so dark? I told you to have the appetizers plated by now. Call me back instantly." I smiled and tapped the second voicemail time-stamped 3 minutes later. The annoyance had escalated into pure, unfiltered hysteria. The mask of the refined church-going Atlanta matriarch had completely slipped. "Chloe, where is the food? The refrigerator is completely empty. Did you put the prime rib in the secondary fridge in the garage? Answer your phone right now. This is not a game." The third voicemail was an absolute masterpiece of human desperation. I could hear chaotic rustling, slamming cabinets, and heavy breathing in the background. "My God, what did you do to Preston's suit? It is in the trash. It is covered in coffee. You malicious, ungrateful girl. Get back here right now. Sterling Pierce is going to be here in less than an hour. Where is the catering? Where are the side dishes? If you ruin your brother-in-law's career, I swear you are dead to this family." She was screaming so loudly the microphone distorted her voice. I switched over to my text messages. Jada was having a total meltdown in the family group chat. She typed entirely in capital letters. "Preston's boss is here in an hour. Get back here. You are ruining Preston's life. If you do not fix this, I swear I will never speak to you again." Preston followed up with his own aggressive demands, his texts popping up in rapid succession. "You better be picking up the food right now. Get back to the house and press my backup suit. I am not playing games with you, Chloe. You owe this family." I stared at the glowing screen. They still thought they were in charge. They still believed that their threats carried weight, that their anger would bring me running back to scrub their floors and salvage their reputations. They had spent their entire lives treating me like an indentured servant, convinced that my sole purpose on this earth was to act as a stepping stone for their social climbing. They honestly believed I was sitting in traffic somewhere, terrified of their wrath, rushing to fix a mess they brought upon themselves. I stood up and walked to the edge of the yacht. The sunset was painting the Florida sky in spectacular shades of violet and crushed gold. The multi-million-dollar vessels bobbed gently in the marina behind me, a testament to the empire I built with my own 2 hands while they were busy looking down on me. I held up my crystal glass, ensuring the massive diamond ring on my right hand caught the fading sunlight. I angled my phone to capture my relaxed, glowing face, the pristine yacht deck, and the sprawling ocean behind me. I snapped the picture. It was flawless. I looked wealthy, unbothered, and entirely out of their reach. I opened the family group chat. I did not type a long paragraph defending myself. I did not explain my feelings, my trauma, or the years of emotional abuse I endured. I did not apologize. People with power do not over-explain. I attached the photo of myself on the yacht. Underneath it, I typed exactly 2 sentences. "I am on vacation. You wanted to impress him. Impress him." I hit send. I watched the delivery status change to read almost instantly. I could practically feel the oxygen getting sucked out of my kitchen in Atlanta. I imagined them staring at the screen, their brains short-circuiting as they looked from my empty refrigerator and the pink sticky note to my smiling face on a luxury yacht. They had exactly 45 minutes before a billionaire walked through their front door, expecting a 5-star dining experience, and they had absolutely nothing but panic, a ruined suit, and their own inflated egos. Before another text could come through, before my mother could dial my number again to scream empty threats into the void, I swiped down on my screen and pressed the crescent moon icon. "Do not disturb." The phone went dark and silent. I set it back down on the table. The ocean breeze ruffled my hair. The silence on the deck was profound and beautiful. For 35 years, I carried the weight of their expectations, their insults, and their relentless demands. Tonight, I carried nothing but a cocktail glass. The trap was sprung. The board was set. There was absolutely nothing they could do to stop the impending disaster. I closed my eyes, listened to the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull, and let them burn. The first sign of the impending disaster arrived via a text from Jada, time-stamped at exactly 6:59 p.m. It was a single panicked sentence. "He is pulling into the driveway." I could picture the scene in my Atlanta home with crystal clarity. The heavy oak front door opening to reveal Sterling Pierce standing on the porch, perfectly punctual, radiating the quiet authority of a man who commanded billions. He would be wearing a tailored suit, likely charcoal gray, his expression polite but observant. According to the chaotic voicemails that flooded my phone over the next hour, the reality of Sterling's arrival was even worse than I imagined. Vivian left a message that sounded like a distress transmission from a sinking ship. She described Sterling walking into the foyer, his eyes immediately scanning the environment. He was a man who noticed everything. He would have noticed the lack of savory aromas wafting from the kitchen. He would have noticed the frantic energy vibrating off Preston, who, according to Vivian, was sweating so profusely his shirt was dampening at the collar. Jada's subsequent text painted an even bleaker picture. Preston, trying to overcompensate for his ruined suit and the palpable tension in the house, greeted Sterling with a loud, overly familiar laugh. Sterling, according to Jada's frantic messages, simply raised an eyebrow at Preston's booming voice and offered a stiff handshake. The man hated sycophants, and Preston was currently embodying the worst kind of corporate desperation. Vivian attempted to salvage the situation by playing the composed hostess. I could hear her in one of the pocket-dialed voicemails, her voice unnaturally high-pitched as she offered Sterling a drink. Sterling politely declined, asking instead if he might wash his hands before dinner. The request, simple and expected, threw my mother into a new tailspin. She directed him to the powder room, her voice trembling. The real catastrophe, however, was unfolding in the kitchen. Jada's texts became increasingly erratic as she described the desperate scramble to secure food. They had ordered from an upscale local restaurant, hoping to pass the meal off as a private catering service. The delivery driver, however, was lost in our sprawling suburban neighborhood. "Where is the food?" Jada typed her messages, appearing in rapid succession. "The driver is not answering. Preston is running out of small talk. Sterling asked what we were having for dinner, and Mom almost choked on her wine." I sat on my yacht in Palm Beach, sipping my cocktail and watching the digital meltdown with clinical detachment. They had built an entire evening around the illusion of perfection, an illusion they expected me to sustain. Now, faced with the reality of their own incompetence, they were completely unraveling. A voicemail from my father Roland arrived next. His voice, usually booming and authoritative, was hushed and strained. Chloe answered the damn phone. He hissed. "The delivery driver went to the wrong house. Preston is trying to distract Sterling in the living room, but the man is not stupid. He knows something is wrong. The house smells like panic and nothing else." I could visualize Roland pacing in the hallway, his face flushed with embarrassment. This was the man who had ordered me to serve quietly, who had prioritized Preston's promotion over my basic dignity. Now he was hiding from a billionaire in his daughter's hallway, desperately waiting for lukewarm takeout. The delivery driver finally arrived at 7:15 p.m. According to Jada's frantic updates, she described the chaotic scene in the kitchen. Vivian frantically unboxing styrofoam containers, desperately trying to transfer the food onto her imported china. The prime rib they had planned was replaced by whatever the restaurant had available on short notice, likely steak medallions that had steamed in their containers during the delayed delivery. "They are cold." Jada texted, her desperation palpable. "The food is cold and the sauce separated. Mom is trying to microwave the plates. It is a disaster." I imagined Vivian, the self-proclaimed matriarch of Atlanta's elite society, standing in my kitchen frantically microwaving lukewarm steak while a billionaire waited in the dining room. The sheer indignity of it must have been crushing her. The dinner service, as described in a later tearful voicemail from Vivian, was an exercise in pure humiliation. Sterling Pierce, a man accustomed to Michelin star dining, sat at my formal dining table and was presented with a hastily microwaved meal. He took one bite of the rubbery steak, set his fork down, and politely asked for a glass of water. He did not complain. He did not make a scene. His silence was far more devastating than any critique could have been. Preston, sensing the catastrophic failure of the evening, attempted his final desperate maneuver. I received a voice memo from Jada that captured the audio of the dining room. Preston's voice was loud, artificially jovial, and laced with a pathetic attempt at camaraderie. "I must apologize for the culinary presentation tonight," Sterling Preston said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "We had a slight issue with our household help. My sister-in-law was supposed to handle the catering, but she is a bit unreliable. You know how it is. Sometimes you have to make do when the staff drops the ball." The silence that followed Preston's comment was so profound. I could feel it through the recording. Sterling Pierce was a man who valued accountability above all else. He despised executives who passed the buck, who blamed others for their own failures. Preston had just committed the ultimate sin in Sterling's eyes. I heard Sterling's voice calm, steady, and utterly terrifying. "Is that so?" Preston Sterling asked. "You find it acceptable to blame a family member for your own lack of preparation?" Preston stammered clearly, realizing he had miscalculated. "Well, sir, I just meant that she was supposed to leadership." Sterling interrupted his voice, cutting through Preston's excuses. "Like a scalpel is about accountability. It is about taking ownership of your environment. If you cannot manage a simple dinner without resorting to blaming your sister-in-law, I shudder to think how you handle a crisis in the boardroom." The recording captured the sound of a chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I believe I have seen enough," Sterling said, his tone, leaving no room for argument. Preston's voice was panicked now, pleading. "Sir, please. The meal was just a minor setback. We have a wonderful dessert planned, and I have a flight to catch," Sterling stated firmly. "I am meeting the chairwoman of our parent company tomorrow morning in Palm Beach. She is a woman of impeccable standards, something this household clearly lacks." The recording ended abruptly. The trap had sprung. The illusion was shattered. Preston's hubris had met Sterling's absolute standard of accountability, and Preston had been found entirely lacking. I set my phone down, the ocean breeze cooling the Florida night. The dinner was over, but the true reckoning was just beginning. I set my phone down on the teakwood table of the yacht deck. The audio recording of Sterling walking out had ended, but my curiosity was far from satisfied. Hearing the destruction of Preston's ego was glorious, but I wanted to see it. I wanted to witness the exact visual manifestation of their failure. I picked up my secure tablet and opened the encrypted application for my home security system. My Atlanta residence was equipped with discreet, state-of-the-art cameras in every common area. I synced the audio, fed the video to my tablet screen, and rewound the timeline to exactly 7:15 inches the evening. The kitchen feed flickered to life in crystal-clearer high definition. I leaned back and poured myself another glass of champagne, watching the absolute spectacle unfold. The side door from the garage burst open. Jada stumbled into my pristine kitchen, clutching 3 massive, greasy brown paper bags. The logo of a mid-tier chain restaurant was stamped across the side. She slammed the bags onto my white granite kitchen island, panting heavily. Vivian rushed in right behind her, her designer silk dress looking entirely out of place amidst the panic. "Open them," Vivian hissed, her voice shrill and frantic. "Played everything immediately. He is in the living room asking Preston about market projections, and Preston is sweating through his undershirt." Jada ripped open the brown paper bags. The sound of crinkling paper and snapping styrofoam echoed through the camera audio. The smell must have been atrocious. Instead of the slow-roasted prime rib with garlic, herb butter, and truffle-whipped potatoes I usually prepared for high-profile clients, they were staring at 6 sad containers of strip mall steak and lukewarm sides. "We cannot serve him this." Jada panicked, her hands shaking as she pulled out a plastic container of congealed mashed potatoes. "Look at it, Mom. The gravy is separated. The steak is basically rubber. Preston is going to lose his mind. He is going to murder Chloe for this." Vivian slapped her hand on the granite counter. "Do not mention that ungrateful girl. We will deal with her later. Right now, we fix this. Get the Limoges porcelain, get the Baccar crystal. If the presentation is flawless, he might not notice the quality. Old money values presentation." I actually laughed out loud on my yacht. The delusion was staggering. Sterling Pierce dined at the finest restaurants in Tokyo, Paris, and New York. He owned a private vineyard in Tuscany. Slapping a chain restaurant steak onto a $1,000 plate was like putting a bumper sticker on a Bentley. It did not elevate the food, it only highlighted the absolute absurdity of the situation. I watched in high definition as the two women who had spent my entire life looking down on me frantically tried to do the very job they deemed beneath them. It was a masterclass in culinary desecration. Vivian grabbed my imported French porcelain plates from the glass display cabinets. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped one. Jada began scooping the sad, separated mashed potatoes onto the center of the plates, using a plastic serving spoon. The steaks were next. They pulled the meat out of the styrofoam containers. A pool of reddish-brown liquid spilled across my white granite counter. Vivian grabbed a roll of paper towels and began frantically scrubbing the grease. "Microwave it," Jada cried out, pointing at the meat. "It is ice cold." Vivian shoved two of the porcelain plates into my built-in microwave and slammed the door, jabbing the high power button. The hum of the microwave filled the kitchen, accompanied by the pathetic popping sounds of cheap steak being nuked into shoe leather. This was the elite Atlanta matriarch who looked down on anyone who did not attend the right country club or wear the right labels. Here she was standing in the kitchen of the daughter she called a failure, frantically microwaving delivery food in a designer gown. The sheer indignity of it was poetic. "Wipe the rims," Vivian barked, pulling the plates out of the microwave with a pair of oven mitts. "There are grease stains on the porcelain. He cannot see that. He cannot know we ordered this. Wipe it clean, Jada." Jada scrubbed the edges of the plates with a damp cloth, her perfectly manicured nails catching on the porcelain. They attempted to garnish the plates with a few sprigs of wilted parsley they found in the back of my crisper drawer. The final result was visually tragic. A gray, overcooked piece of meat, sitting next to a sad lump of potatoes masquerading as fine dining. "Take it out," Vivian commanded, taking a deep breath and smoothing the front of her dress. "Smile, Jada. Walk slowly. Act like this was exactly what we planned." I tapped the screen and switched the feed to the formal dining room camera. The lighting was dimmed, the crystal chandelier casting a warm glow over the long mahogany table. Sterling Pierce sat at the head of the table, a picture of calm, intimidating authority. Preston sat to his right, looking like a man awaiting a guilty verdict. The double doors swung open. Vivian and Jada marched into the dining room, carrying the plates with forced artificial smiles. They placed the food down in front of Sterling. "Bon appetit, Vivian," said her voice trembling slightly. "A simple classic cut this evening." Sterling looked down at the plate. He did not say a word. He did not pick up his fork. He simply stared at the microwaved steak and the congealed potatoes. The silence in the dining room was so heavy it felt suffocating even through the digital feed. Preston cleared his throat aggressively, attempting to fill the void. He picked up his knife and cut into his own steak. The sound of the serrated edge sawing through the tough meat echoed loudly. "Excellent choice," Vivian pressed and lied, his voice cracking. "Really top tier." Sterling slowly raised his eyes from the plate and looked directly at Preston. Then he looked at Vivian. His expression was not angry. It was completely blank, which was infinitely worse. It was the look of a man who realized he was sitting in a room full of frauds. "I will just have a glass of water," Sterling said softly, pushing the $1,000 plate a few inches away from him. The color completely drained from Vivian's face. Jada looked like she was going to be sick. Preston dropped his knife, his hand trembling so badly the silverware clattered against the table. I watched the rest of the agonizing silence play out before Preston launched into his pathetic speech, blaming me for the catering failure. I watched Sterling deliver his brutal assessment of Preston's leadership. I watched Sterling stand up, button his suit jacket, and walk out the front door without a single backward glance. When the front door clicked shut, the dining room erupted. Preston stood up and hurled his water glass against the wall, shattering the crystal into 100 pieces. Jada collapsed into a dining chair, sobbing hysterically. Vivian stood at the head of the table, her chest heaving, her perfect facade entirely destroyed. "My life is over," Preston screamed, pulling at his hair. "He is going to fire me. I am dead at that firm. I am absolute dead weight. It is Chloe's fault." Vivian shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the empty kitchen. "That malicious, spiteful girl. She set us up. She humiliated us on purpose. We are not letting this go, Preston. We are not letting her get away with destroying this family." I tapped the screen, ending the security feed and plunging my tablet into darkness. I sat back on the deck of my yacht, the warm Florida night wrapping around me. They were broken, humiliated, and terrified. But the best part was that they still had no idea who they were actually dealing with. They thought they were going to hunt down a runaway maid to exact their revenge. They had no idea they were about to march straight into the corporate fortress of the woman who held their entire future in the palm of her hand. I watched the security feed as the heavy oak front door slammed shut behind Sterling. But Preston was not going to let it end there. His fragile ego simply could not accept the monumental defeat. He sprinted after the billionaire, pushing aggressively past Jada and Vivian, who were still frozen in the dining room. I switched my tablet to the exterior driveway cameras. The high-definition night vision captured every pathetic detail of Preston making his final fatal mistake. Sterling was walking calmly down the brick pathway toward his waiting black town car. His driver had already stepped out and was holding the rear door open. Preston burst out onto the front porch, his dress shirt completely soaked through with sweat and his tie hanging loosely around his neck. He stumbled down the steps and actually ran in front of Sterling, physically blocking the billionaire from reaching his vehicle. "Mr. Pierce, please. You have to let me explain," Preston begged, holding up both his hands in a gesture of pure desperation. "You cannot leave like this. The dinner, the food, the absolute mess inside it was not my fault. We had a domestic issue tonight. My sister-in-law, Chloe, she is the one who ruined everything." Sterling stopped. He did not step back, but his posture grew incredibly rigid. He looked at Preston with eyes so cold they practically frosted the camera lens. I turned up the audio feed on my tablet to maximum volume, leaning back into my lounge chair to listen to Preston dig his own professional grave. "She is lazy and entirely ungrateful," Preston continued, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet, upscale Atlanta neighborhood. "We let her stay around out of charity, because my wife feels sorry for her. She was supposed to handle the catering this evening, but she is incredibly jealous of my success. She is a bitter 5-year-old, single woman with no husband and no real career. She sabotaged this dinner on purpose just to humiliate me in front of you. You know how it is with these types of people, sir. They resent ambition. She is nothing but good-for-nothing help who completely forgot her place." I sat on my yacht listening to my brother-in-law spew venom. Preston thought he was building camaraderie. He thought Sterling, a wealthy billionaire, would simply nod and agree that the help was always problematic. He expected Sterling to overlook the catastrophic evening because they were two corporate men of industry, commiserating over an incompetent and jealous family member. It was the ultimate display of Preston's arrogant hubris. He thought throwing the black woman under the bus would secure his bond with the white CEO. He was dead wrong. Sterling stood perfectly still under the bright glare of the driveway floodlights. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and lethal. "Preston, do you know what the core metric of a successful private equity executive is?" Sterling asked. "It is not financial modeling or market forecasting. It is the ability to maintain absolute composure and accountability when a system fails." Sterling took one deliberate step forward, forcing Preston to shrink back against the side of the black car. "You invited me into your home," Sterling continued. "You presented me with a fraudulent meal, and now, instead of owning your massive failure, you are standing in your driveway, sweating like a cornered animal and blaming a woman for your own sheer incompetence." Just then, the front door opened again. Vivian and Jada rushed out onto the porch. They had heard Preston yelling and decided they needed to back his play to save their social standing. "It is true, Mr. Pierce." Vivian called out her designer heels, clicking frantically on the brick steps as she hurried toward the driveway. "My daughter Chloe is severely troubled. She set us up tonight. We are victims of her malicious jealousy. Please do not hold this against Preston. He is a brilliant vice president and he works so hard for your firm. I watched my mother throw her own flesh and blood to the wolves just to protect her son-in-law's paycheck. It was the ultimate betrayal, but it did not hurt me anymore. It only confirmed exactly why I had walked away." Sterling slowly turned his head to look at Vivian and Jada standing in the driveway. Then he looked back at Preston. The disgust on his face was palpable. Sterling was a man who demanded loyalty, integrity, and extreme ownership from his corporate officers. Watching an entire family mob together to tear down an absent relative just to save a corporate promotion absolutely repulsed him. It went against everything my firm Apex Zenith stood for. "I do not employ victims." Preston Sterling said, his words slicing through the humid Atlanta air. "I employ leaders. A man who cannot manage a simple dinner arrangement without his entire household descending into toxic chaos is a massive liability. A man who publicly degrades his own family to save his own skin lacks the fundamental character required to sit at my boardroom table." Preston opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came out. He was suffocating under the weight of his own destruction. Sterling turned to his driver. "Open the door," he instructed. The driver swiftly pulled the car door open wider. Sterling paused, looking over his shoulder one last time. He addressed the three of them standing paralyzed in the driveway. "I am flying to Palm Beach tonight," Sterling stated firmly. "I have a highly confidential strategic summit with the chairwoman of our parent company tomorrow morning. She built a multi-billion-dollar empire from the ground up because she understands accountability, execution, and respect. I suggest you spend the rest of your evening reflecting on your profound lack of all three." Sterling stepped into the back of the town car, and the door closed with a heavy, solid thud. The black vehicle rolled smoothly out of the driveway, leaving Preston, Jada, and Vivian standing completely exposed in the glow of the security floodlights. I watched the red taillights disappear down the dark street. On my tablet screen, Preston fell to his knees on the concrete driveway. He grabbed his hair and let out a guttural scream of absolute defeat. Jada ran down the steps trying to comfort him, but he shoved her hands away aggressively. Vivian stood frozen on the porch, her hands covering her mouth, staring into the darkness where all her carefully curated social ambitions had just completely evaporated. They had tried to serve me up as the convenient scapegoat to a man who secretly worked directly for me. Preston thought throwing my name in the dirt would salvage his sinking career. Instead, it was the exact catalyst that destroyed it. Sterling was disgusted by their lack of accountability, but he had no idea he was defending his actual boss in the process. I locked my secure tablet and set it down on the table, next to my empty champagne flute. I took a deep breath of the warm ocean air, feeling the gentle sway of the yacht beneath my feet. The appetizer was officially served. The main course was coming tomorrow. My family was desperate, arrogant, and obsessed with their image. I knew they would not just accept this defeat. They were going to try to fix it, and their desperation was going to drive them right into my territory. The warm Florida breeze swept across the bow of the Zenith as I sat in the quiet luxury of my yacht. I had watched Preston fall to his knees in my driveway, and I knew the night was far from over. Desperation is a powerful motivator for people who have never faced actual consequences. I picked up my phone and disabled the Do Not Disturb feature just long enough to check the blocked voicemail folder. I knew my mother would not let the evening end without attempting to have the last word. There it was. A new voicemail from Vivian, time-stamped just minutes after Sterling's Blacktown car disappeared down my street. I tapped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. Vivian did not sound like a refined Atlanta socialite anymore. She sounded like a cornered animal. The background audio was a symphony of destruction. I could hear glass shattering against the hardwood floors. Preston was completely losing his mind, tearing through my living room, throwing decorative pillows and cursing my name. Jada was sobbing loudly, her wails echoing off the high ceilings. "Listen to me, you malicious, ungrateful little girl." Vivian hissed into the receiver, her voice dripping with pure venom. "You think you have won? You think you can humiliate this family and just hide on some cheap vacation? Preston's entire career is hanging by a single thread because of your jealousy. He is the only real success this family has, and you sabotaged him because you cannot stand being a failure." I took a slow sip of my champagne. The projection was absolutely staggering. "We are not going to let you destroy us." Vivian continued her, breathing heavy and erratic. "Preston is not going to lose his promotion over a ruined dinner. He still has his corporate access on his phone. He tracked Sterling's flight itinerary. We know exactly where he is going. He is staying at the Opal Reserve Resort in Palm Beach for some massive corporate summit." I smiled into the darkness. Preston was incredibly predictable. He used his lower-level executive clearance to look up his CEO's travel logistics, a massive violation of corporate privacy protocols. It was just another nail in his professional coffin, but he was too blind to see it. "We are packing the car right now," Vivian declared, her voice rising in pitch. "We are leaving Atlanta and we are driving straight down to Florida through the night. Preston is going to walk right into that resort tomorrow morning, and he is going to talk to Sterling face to face. He is going to explain that you are a mentally unstable woman who deliberately ruined his dinner to extort money from us. He is going to save his job. And when we are done fixing your mess, we are going to find you, Chloe. I do not care what cheap motel you are hiding in. We are going to find you, and I am going to make you pay for what you did tonight." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I lowered the phone from my ear. My mother, Vivian, actually believed she could pack her golden child daughter and her arrogant son-in-law into an SUV drive 14 hours down Interstate 95 and casually stroll into the most highly secured private corporate retreat in the country. She thought she could manipulate a billionaire CEO by spinning a ridiculous lie about my mental health. She honestly believed I was cowering in a budget motel, terrified of her impending wrath. The sheer volume of their delusion was almost intoxicating. They were bringing the fight directly to my doorstep. They were voluntarily marching into the absolute epicenter of my power. I opened my encrypted messaging application and typed a quick note to David, my head of executive security. David, I am anticipating some unauthorized visitors at the Opal Reserve Resort tomorrow morning, a white luxury SUV with Georgia license plates. They will likely be highly agitated and demand entry. Do not turn them away at the perimeter gate. When they arrive, notify me immediately and grant them access to the main lobby. I want them to walk right in. David replied within 10 seconds. Understood, boss. I will brief the perimeter team. We will handle them according to your instructions. I locked my phone and stood up from my lounge chair. The night was quiet, the only sound being the gentle lapping of the ocean against the hull of my yacht. I had spent 35 years allowing these people to diminish my worth. I had allowed them to dictate my value based on their shallow, superficial metrics. Tomorrow morning, that entire dynamic would be permanently erased. I walked down the illuminated spiral staircase into the master cabin of the yacht. The space was a sanctuary of modern luxury with mahogany paneling and a massive king-sized bed. I slipped out of my resort dress and went through my evening skincare routine with meticulous care. I needed to look flawless tomorrow. I was not just addressing the board of Apex Zenith, I was officially terminating my family's hold over my life. I slept soundly, deeply, and without a single ounce of guilt. When the morning sun began streaming through the porthole windows, I woke up feeling completely energized. I ordered a light breakfast of fresh fruit and black coffee from my onboard staff. I sat at the dining table reviewing the final acquisition portfolios. Everything was in perfect order. The transfer of power was absolute. I owned Preston's firm. I moved to my dressing room to prepare for the summit. Today required a specific kind of armor. I chose a custom-tailored white designer suit. The cut was sharp, authoritative, and undeniably feminine. I paired it with gold accents and a pair of red-bottom stilettos that commanded respect with every step. I styled my hair in a sleek low bun, keeping my makeup clean and professional. When I looked in the full-length mirror, I did not see the maid my mother tried to force into the kitchen. I saw a titan of industry. I saw a woman who controlled billions of dollars in assets. I saw the boss. I gathered my leather portfolio and stepped off the yacht. A pristine black town car was waiting for me at the edge of the marina. The driver opened the door and I slid into the leather interior. The drive to the Opal Reserve Resort took less than 15 minutes. The resort was a sprawling architectural masterpiece of Spanish colonial design, surrounded by towering palm trees and strictly guarded privacy walls. My firm had rented out the entire property for the weekend. Every single person on the premises was either an employee of the resort or an executive working under the Apex Zenith umbrella. The town car pulled up to the main entrance. The valet opened my door and I stepped out onto the pristine cobblestone driveway. The Florida sun was warm and brilliant. I walked through the massive glass doors and into the grand marble lobby. The space was breathtaking, featuring towering ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and a centerpiece fountain surrounded by exotic orchids. Several of my senior executives were already gathered in small clusters, reviewing documents and drinking coffee. When I walked in, they immediately stood taller, offering respectful nods and quiet greetings. "Good morning, Chloe," one of my managing directors said, handing me a freshly printed agenda. "We are just about ready to begin the opening session. Sterling Pierce arrived about 20 minutes ago. He is reviewing the quarterly projections in the executive lounge." "Excellent," I replied, accepting the agenda. "I will join him shortly." Just as I turned toward the conference wing, my security earpiece, which I wore discreetly beneath my hair, chirped softly. It was David. Boss David's voice came through crisp and professional. "We have a situation at the main gate. A white SUV with Georgia plates just pulled up. 4 individuals inside. They are highly agitated. The older female passenger is screaming at the gate attendant, demanding to be let in. She is claiming her son-in-law is a vital executive working for Sterling Pierce." I smiled a slow, calculated smile that did not reach my eyes. The timing was absolutely poetic. They had driven all night, fueled by nothing but spite and desperation, and they had arrived right on cue. "Let them through, David," I commanded, my voice low and steady. "Open the gates, escort them directly into the main lobby. Do not tell them who authorized their entry. Let them believe their arrogant demands actually worked. Copy that, boss, David replied. Opening the gates now. I stood near the center fountain, adjusting the cuffs of my white blazer. I looked around the opulent marble lobby. My executives were sipping artisan coffee. My security personnel were positioned perfectly at the exits. The stage was set, the audience was present. I took a deep breath of the fragrant air and waited for the doors to open. The final act of their humiliation was about to commence. I tapped my earpiece to silence the feed, the irony of their desperation washing over me. They were acting like tourists trying to crash an exclusive nightclub, completely oblivious to the fact that I owned the building, the guest list, and the bouncers. Send them in, I instructed David. Make sure they walk right up to me. I took a deep breath, smoothing the lapels of my white blazer. The morning sun illuminated the grand lobby, catching the gold accents of my suit. My security detail melted into the background, becoming shadows in the pristine space. The stage was set. The heavy mahogany doors swung open. My family stumbled into the lobby, a chaotic blur of panic and exhaustion. Vivian marched at the front, her eyes scanning the room with manic intensity. Preston trailed behind his face, pale, his suit crumpled, looking like a man walking to his execution. Jada clutched her designer handbag, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Roland brought up the rear, his usual booming authority replaced by a nervous, quiet shuffle. They looked entirely out of place in the opulent setting, their frantic energy clashing with the serene, calculated atmosphere of the corporate retreat. Vivian spotted me immediately. Her eyes narrowed the prejudice so deeply ingrained that she completely failed to process the reality of my appearance. She didn't see the custom-tailored suit, the red-bottom heels, or the aura of absolute control. She only saw the maid she had tried to force into the kitchen. Chloe. Vivian snapped, marching across the marble floor. Are you working the concierge desk now? Good. Get Preston a meeting room with Sterling Pierce immediately. We know he's staying here. We need to fix this mess you created. Preston stepped forward, the arrogance returning to his voice emboldened by my mother's delusion. Fix this, Chloe, he demanded, snapping his fingers at me. A grotesque echo of Thanksgiving dinner. Point me to Sterling, then go out to the rental car and get my bags. You owe us for the embarrassment you caused. Jada chimed in her voice, shrill. And you better find us a room, too. The front desk said they were completely, clear's throat, booked for a private corporate retreat. Tell them your staff, and get us checked in. We drove all night because of you. I looked at them, their entitlement breathtaking in its absurdity. They stood in the most exclusive resort in the country, barking orders at me as if we were still in my Atlanta kitchen. I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I looked at them with absolute ice. You are trespassing on my private property, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Before Vivian could open her mouth to scream, the heavy mahogany doors of the conference wing opened. Sterling Pierce walked into the lobby, flanked by a team of 6 senior executives. He was dressed in a sharp gray suit, reviewing a financial document. As he walked, exuding the quiet authority that had terrified Preston the night before, Preston practically shoved Jada out of the way to intercept him. He sprinted across the lobby, a desperate, overly eager smile plastered on his face. Sterling Sir Preston choked out, sweating profusely. I'm so glad I caught you. About last night in Atlanta, I can explain everything. It was a complete misunderstanding with the household help. Sterling didn't even break his stride. He didn't look at Preston. He didn't acknowledge the apology. He walked straight past Preston, leaving my brother-in-law standing in the middle of the floor with his hand extended to empty air. Sterling walked directly toward the velvet sofa where I was sitting. As he approached, he stopped, handed his documents to an assistant, and extended his hand toward me with a deep, respectful nod. Chloe, Sterling said, his voice ringing clear and authoritative across the silent lobby. Thank you for flying down early. The board is assembled and ready for your opening address, boss. The silence in the lobby was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Jada's jaw actually dropped open. Roland stumbled backward, bumping into a luggage cart. Preston spun around looking like he had just been physically struck. He looked from Sterling to me and back to Sterling, his brain completely failing to process the reality unfolding in front of him. Boss Preston choked out his voice, cracking into a high-pitched squeak. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my white suit. I looked Preston dead in the eye, my voice echoing in the vast space. Yes, Preston, I am the founder and chairwoman of Apex Zenith, which means I own 60% of your firm. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, and since I expect absolute accountability from my leadership, something you clearly lack as of this exact moment, you are fired. Preston collapsed internally, his knees visibly shaking. Jada burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. Vivian, completely shattered by the destruction of her entire social universe, tried to backtrack desperately. Her tone switched instantly from demanding to sickeningly sweet. "Chloe, baby," Vivian stammered, reaching out a trembling hand toward me. "We had no idea. We're family. We always knew you were special. We're so proud of you." I held up a single hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. "I am not your baby," I said, my words dropping like anvils. "I am the maid you tried to force into the kitchen." I turned my head and gave David a slight nod. "Security," I commanded. "Escort these unauthorized individuals off my property." I turned my back on them, taking Sterling's arm and walking toward the boardroom. I didn't look back, even as Vivian screamed my name, and Preston begged for his job while the security team physically dragged them out the front doors. 6 months later, my life was exactly where it belonged. Preston was unemployed and completely unhireable in the financial sector after the news of his termination spread. Jada deleted all her social media accounts, unable to face the embarrassment. My parents' social standing in Atlanta was entirely ruined after the truth leaked to their entire country club. I was sitting on my yacht, thriving in absolute peace. Blood makes you related. I checked my reflection one last time in the expansive mirror of the executive dressing suite. The white custom-tailored suit fit like armor, the gold accents gleaming under the soft recessed lighting. I had spent the morning reviewing the final acquisition parameters, the legal transfers, and the structural overhaul of Preston's private equity firm. Everything was flawless. I was no longer the silent daughter in the corner of the dining room. I was the undeniable center of gravity in a multi-billion-dollar ecosystem. I stepped out of the suite and walked down the wide, sunlit corridor toward the main lobby of the Opal Reserve Resort. The Florida morning was vibrant, the air carrying the scent of salt and blooming jasmine. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the pristine grounds, the manicured lawns, and the sparkling ocean beyond. My executives were already gathering the low hum of professional conversation, echoing in the vast marble space. I was completely in my element, powerful, respected, and surrounded by brilliant minds who hung on my every word. As I approached the center fountain, my head of security, David, materialized from the periphery. His posture was rigid, his expression a mask of professional neutrality. He tapped his earpiece, listening intently for a moment before stepping into my path. "Boss, we have a situation at the main gate," David reported, his voice low and steady. A white luxury SUV with Georgia plates just pulled up. 4 individuals inside. They are highly agitated. I stopped walking, a slow, cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. The timing was exquisite. They had driven through the night fueled by desperation and an arrogant belief that they could simply demand their way out of a catastrophic failure. Describe the individuals I instructed, though I already knew exactly who was sitting in that vehicle. An older female passenger is currently screaming at the gate attendant. David continued. She is demanding immediate entry, claiming her son-in-law is a vital executive working directly for Sterling Pierce. She insists they have urgent business regarding the summit. The driver appears to be sweating profusely and is repeatedly honking the horn. A younger female is crying in the back seat, and an older male is attempting unsuccessfully to calm the situation. It was exactly as I had predicted. Vivian was deploying her usual tactic of loud, entitled aggression, expecting the world to bow to her volume. Preston was unraveling the reality of his impending professional doom, manifesting as pure panic. Jada was reverting to tears, her primary defense mechanism, when the golden child facade cracked and Roland was uselessly attempting to maintain order in a situation he had entirely lost control over. "They are demanding to see the resort manager," David added. "The older female is threatening to have the gate attendant fired." I looked around the opulent marble lobby. My managing directors were sipping artisan coffee. My security personnel were positioned perfectly at the exits. The stage was set, and the audience was present. This was not a private family squabble. This was a corporate reckoning. "Let them through, David." I commanded, my voice devoid of any emotion. "Open the gates. Escort them directly into the main lobby." David raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise breaking through his professional demeanor. Boss, are you certain they are highly combative? I am absolutely certain, I replied. Do not tell them who authorized their entry. Let them believe their arrogant demands actually worked. Let them think they have bullied their way into the summit. I want them to walk right in here expecting to find a desperate hiding maid, only to find the architect of their destruction. Copy that, boss. David replied, his tone returning to crisp efficiency. He relayed the order into his radio. Perimeter team, open the main gates. Escort the white SUV to the central valet. Do not engage in conversation. I stood near the center fountain, adjusting the cuffs of my white blazer. The water cascaded behind me, a soothing contrast to the impending storm. I took a deep breath of the fragrant air and waited for the heavy mahogany doors to open. The final act of their humiliation was about to commence, and I was going to savor every single second of it. I watched them march across the polished marble floor of the grand lobby. They were a walking disaster. Vivian was leading the charge, but her usually immaculate hair was frizzy from the humidity and the grueling 4-hour car ride. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, and her posture carried a frantic, chaotic energy that completely shattered her carefully curated Atlanta high society image. Preston looked significantly worse. His golf shirt was stained with sweat under the arms. His eyes were bloodshot, and he moved with the erratic twitchiness of a man whose career was flashing before his eyes. Jada dragged her feet behind him, clutching her expensive handbag like a life preserver, while my father Roland shuffled at the back of the pack, looking entirely defeated and unusually quiet. They looked completely out of place in the opulent, serene setting of the Opal Reserve Resort. Yet their signature arrogance remained entirely intact. Vivian locked eyes with me. She marched straight past the actual concierge desk, ignoring the highly trained resort staff, and headed directly for the center fountain where I was standing. Her mind, deeply infected with her own toxic prejudice and unwavering belief in my inferiority, completely bypassed the reality of the situation. She did not see my custom-tailored white designer suit. She did not register the gold accents, the flawless styling, or the red bottom heels. She only saw her scapegoat daughter standing in a hotel lobby, which to her meant I was simply the hired help. Chloe Vivian snapped her voice sharp and echoing off the high ceilings, drawing the discreet attention of several nearby executives. Are you working the concierge desk now? I suppose it is a step up from your usual catering gigs, but we do not have time to discuss your employment choices. Get Preston a meeting room with Sterling Pierce immediately. We know he is staying here. We need to fix this mess you created last night. Before I could even process the sheer delusion of her demand, Preston stepped forward. The audacity of this man was astounding. He was practically vibrating with panic, his entire professional life hanging by a thread. Yet he still felt entitled to order me around. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers directly in my face, a repulsive, aggressive echo of our Thanksgiving dinner. Fix this, Chloe Preston demanded, his voice cracking with desperation and unearned authority. Point me to Sterling's suite right now. Then go out to the rental car and get my bags. You owe us for the total embarrassment you caused my career. Do your job and make yourself useful for once. Jada pushed her way to the front, crossing her arms defensively, her face pinched in a scowl. And you better find us a room, too. The actual front desk staff said they were completely booked for some private corporate retreat. Tell your manager you are staff and get us checked in. We drove all night through 3 different states because of your petty little stunt, and I am not sleeping in a rental car. I looked at the 4 of them. They stood in the center of the most exclusive resort in Palm Beach, surrounded by high-level executives and elite security personnel, barking orders at me, as if we were still standing on the linoleum floor of my kitchen. They were completely and utterly disconnected from reality. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of defense or explanation. I simply looked at them with absolute ice. I let the silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds, forcing them to feel the heavy, oppressive weight of my stare. I watched the slight flicker of confusion cross Vivian's face as my silence stretched on a tiny crack in her armor as she slowly realized I was not shrinking away. I am not working the concierge desk, Vivian, I said, my voice low, dangerous and completely steady. And I will not be getting your bags, Preston. I took one slow, deliberate step forward. The sound of my heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, echoing with absolute authority. You are not guests here, I continued, ensuring every single word landed with the force of a physical blow. You are not on the list for this corporate retreat. You are currently trespassing on my private property." The silence that followed my statement was absolute. For a fraction of a second, confusion weared with arrogance on Vivian's face. She opened her mouth, likely to deliver a scathing reprimand about my attitude. But she never got the chance. Before a single word could leave her lips, the heavy mahogany doors of the conference wing opened. Sterling Pierce walked into the lobby. He moved with the effortless, commanding stride of a man accustomed to absolute authority. Flanked by a team of 6 senior executives from his firm, he was dressed in a sharp gray suit, reviewing a financial document. As he walked, he exuded the exact same terrifying composure that had sent Preston into a spiral the night before. Preston spotted him instantly. The sheer panic overriding whatever confusion my words had caused, Preston practically shoved Jada out of the way to intercept his CEO. He sprinted across the polished marble, a desperate, overly eager smile plastered onto his sweating face. Sterling Sir Preston choked out his voice unnaturally loud in the serene lobby. "I am so glad I caught you. About last night in Atlanta, I can explain everything. It was a complete misunderstanding with the household help." Sterling did not even break his stride. He did not look at Preston. He did not acknowledge the apology. He did not slow down. He walked straight past Preston, leaving my brother-in-law standing in the middle of the marble floor with his hand extended to empty air. The visual of Preston ignored and utterly insignificant was a masterpiece. Sterling continued his path, walking directly toward the velvet sofa where I was sitting. As he approached, he stopped. He handed his documents to an assistant who quickly stepped back. Sterling then extended his hand toward me and gave a deep, respectful nod. "Chloe Sterling," said, his voice ringing clear and authoritative across the silent lobby, ensuring every word carried to my paralyzed family. "Thank you for flying down early. The board is assembled and ready for your opening address, boss." The silence that descended upon the lobby was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Jada's jaw actually dropped open, her designer handbag slipping from her grip and hitting the floor with a soft thud. Roland stumbled backward, bumping into a brass luggage cart, his eyes wide with disbelief. Preston spun around, looking like he had just been physically struck. He looked from Sterling to me and then back to Sterling, his brain completely failing to process the reality unfolding in front of him. Boss Preston choked out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak devoid of any bravado. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my white suit. I didn't rush. I let the moment hang, letting the full weight of their humiliation settle over them. I looked Preston dead in the eye, my voice echoing in the vast space, carrying the absolute authority of the position I held. "Yes, Preston," I said, cold and clear. "I am the founder and chairwoman of Apex Zenith, which means I own 60% of your firm." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, and since I expect absolute accountability from my leadership, I continued my gaze, locking him in place. "Something you clearly lack. As of this exact moment, you are fired." Preston collapsed internally. His knees visibly shook, and he slumped against a marble pillar, the realization of his complete professional destruction washing over him. Jada burst into tears, burying her face in her hands, the facade of the golden child entirely shattered. Vivian, however, was a different breed of delusional. Completely uned by the destruction of her entire social universe, she tried to backtrack desperately. Her tone switched instantly, abandoning the shrill demands and adopting a sickeningly sweet, placating cadence. "Chloe," baby Vivian stammered, stepping forward and reaching out a trembling hand toward me. "We had no idea. We're family. We always knew you were special. We're so proud of you." I held up a single hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. "I am not your baby," I said, my words dropping like anvils. "I am the maid you tried to force into the kitchen." I turned my head slightly and gave David a brief nod. "Security!" I commanded, my voice projecting across the lobby. "Escort these unauthorized individuals off my property." I turned my back on them, taking Sterling's offered arm, and began walking toward the boardroom. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could hear Vivian screaming my name, her voice shrill with panic. I could hear Preston begging for his job, his pleasing off the marble, and I could hear the firm, professional commands of my security team as they physically dragged my family out the front doors. 6 months later, my life was exactly where it belonged. Preston remained unemployed, completely unhireable in the financial sector after the news of his termination, and the reasons behind it spread through industry channels. Jada deleted all her social media accounts, unable to face the embarrassment, and the sudden loss of the lifestyle she had flaunted. My parents' social standing in Atlanta was entirely ruined after the truth of the Palm Beach incident leaked to their entire country club. I was sitting on my yacht, thriving in absolute peace. The ocean breeze was warm, the champagne was cold, and my empire was expanding. I had learned a valuable lesson. Blood makes you related, but respect makes you family, and I only surrounded myself with family. The silence following my declaration hung in the pristine air of the lobby like a physical weight. Vivian blinked rapidly, her perfectly manicured hands twitching at her sides. She opened her mouth to speak, likely to deliver another condescending reprimand about my attitude, but the words never materialized. She simply could not compute the reality of the situation. Her brain was completely incapable of processing that the daughter she treated as the hired help possessed the authority to declare this massive luxury resort her private property. Before a single syllable could leave my mother's lips, a distinct shift occurred in the atmosphere of the room. The low hum of professional conversation from my assembled executives instantly ceased. The heavy mahogany double doors leading from the executive conference wing swung open with a synchronized, quiet thud. Sterling Pierce walked into the grand marble lobby. He did not just enter a room, he commanded it. Flanked by a specialized team of 6 senior executives from his firm, Sterling moved with the effortless predatory stride of a man who held absolute authority. He was dressed in a sharp, flawlessly tailored gray suit. His attention was focused downward, reviewing a leather-bound financial document as he walked, but his presence alone was enough to dictate the energy of the entire space. He exuded the exact same terrifying composure that had sent my brother-in-law into a complete downward spiral the night before. Preston spotted his CEO instantly, the sheer panic overriding whatever momentary confusion my words had caused him. Preston went into absolute survival mode. The desperate need to salvage his career completely shattered any remaining shred of his so-called Southern gentleman facade. He lunged forward and practically shoved Jada out of the way to clear a path for himself. My sister stumbled backward, her designer heels skidding against the polished marble as her own husband bulldozed past her without a single glance back. Preston sprinted across the lobby. It was a pathetic display. He was a grown man, a vice president at a major private equity firm, scrambling across the floor like a desperate child. A wide, overly eager smile was plastered onto his sweating face, but his eyes were wide with pure terror. Sterling Sir Preston choked out his voice, unnaturally loud, and strained in the serene environment. "I am so incredibly glad I caught you. About last night in Atlanta. I can explain everything. Please give me 1 minute." It was a complete misunderstanding with the household help. We had a massive emergency that threw the entire evening off schedule, but I promise you that does not reflect my ability to manage my portfolio. Sterling did not even break his stride. He did not look up from his documents. He did not acknowledge the apology. He did not slow his pace by a single fraction of a second. He walked straight past Preston, leaving my brother-in-law standing in the exact center of the marble floor with his hand extended to empty air. The visual of Preston, completely ignored and utterly insignificant, was a masterpiece of corporate karma. It was the physical embodiment of everything Preston feared, becoming invisible, irrelevant, powerless. Sterling continued his path, walking directly toward the velvet sofa where I was sitting. As he approached, my security detail parted seamlessly to allow him through a silent testament to the hierarchy of the room. He stopped just a few feet away from me. He handed his documents to his assistant, who quickly and quietly stepped back into the formation of executives. Sterling then extended his hand toward me and gave a deep, respectful nod. It was not the nod of a superior acknowledging a subordinate. It was the bow of a general presenting himself to his commander. "Chloe," Sterling said, his voice ringing clear and authoritative across the silent lobby, ensuring every single word carried directly back to my paralyzed family. "Thank you for flying down early. The board is assembled and ready for your opening address, boss." The word echoed in the vast space. "Boss." It hung in the air, suspended over the fountain and the crystal chandeliers. I remained seated for just a moment longer, letting the absolute weight of that single syllable drop like an anvil onto the people who had spent my entire life trying to keep me underneath their boots. I looked past Sterling toward my family. They were frozen statues of pure horror. Vivian was staring at Sterling as if the man had just spoken in tongues. Jada was clutching her arm where her husband had shoved her mouth slightly open. Roland was gripping the edge of a brass luggage cart for physical support, and Preston looked as though the floor had simply vanished from beneath his feet. His eyes darted from his billionaire CEO to the woman he had ordered to press his suit just 24 hours ago. His brain was visibly short-circuiting, unable to reconcile the reality of what he had just witnessed. They had driven through the night, completely fueled by arrogance and entitlement. They had stormed the gates of my sanctuary, planning to drag me back to their toxic reality. They had expected to find a woman they could break. Instead, they found a woman who owned the very ground they were trespassing on. They found a woman who commanded the respect of billionaires. They found the architect of their complete and utter destruction, and the realization was absolutely destroying them in real time. The silence in the lobby is absolute. The ambient noise of the luxurious resort seems to vanish entirely, sucked into the vacuum of my family's collective shock. Preston's face drains of all color, replacing his flushed, sweaty panic with a sickening translucent gray. His mouth opens and closes several times, resembling a fish suffocating on dry land. The cognitive dissonance is physically breaking him in real time. He is trying to reconcile the quiet sister-in-law he treated like a servant with the ultimate corporate authority standing before him. Boss Preston chokes out. His voice is barely a whisper cracking violently in the middle of the single syllable. It sounds as though the word itself is tearing his vocal cords apart. I stand up slowly. I smooth the front of my white blazer with total deliberation. I do not rush. I command the pacing of this entire room. I look Preston dead in the eye. My voice rings clear, sharp, and undeniably authoritative across the polished marble floor. Yes, Preston, I say. I am the founder and chairwoman of Apex Zenith, which means I own 60% of your firm. The words strike him with the kinetic force of a freight train. He actually staggers backward. His heel catches on the grout of the marble tiles, and he throws a hand out to catch himself on a brass luggage cart. He looks at Sterling Pierce, his eyes wide and pleading, begging for his CEO to tell him this is some elaborate, cruel joke. Sterling does not offer him a lifeline. Sterling looks at Preston with the same clinical disgust one might reserve for a cockroach on a dining table. Miss Anderson acquired the controlling stake in our parent company 7 months ago. Sterling states, his voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. She orchestrated the entire restructuring of the private equity division. She is the sole reason our quarterly projections have exceeded expectations. You are currently standing in a resort that she rented entirely for her executive board. And you are currently speaking to the woman who signs my paychecks. The confirmation from the billionaire he worships acts as the final blow. Preston's knees buckle slightly. He grabs the brass rail of the luggage cart with both hands, just to remain upright. I turn my attention to my mother. Vivian looks as though she has been physically struck by lightning. Her meticulously crafted high society persona is completely gone. She is staring at the gold accents on my suit, staring at the highly trained security detail flanking me, staring at the billionaire CEO, standing subserviently at my side. Her brain is desperately trying to reconcile the daughter she relegated to the kitchen with the titan of industry dominating the lobby. You, Vivian stammers, her hands trembling wildly. You own a hospitality company. You bake and you plan small parties. You told us you organize local events. I told you I run a luxury hospitality and private equity group. I correct her, my tone completely devoid of warmth. You heard the word hospitality, and your own deep-seated prejudice decided I was a caterer. You assumed I was serving food because that is the only level of success you were willing to accept for me. You were so blinded by your obsession with Preston's mediocre corporate climbing that you never once bothered to look at the empire I was building right in front of you. Jada is completely silent. My golden child sister, the woman who had spent her entire life basking in her parents' favoritism, is standing there watching her husband's career evaporate. Her designer handbag remains on the floor where she dropped it. She looks at me, and for the first time in 35 years, I see genuine fear in her eyes. She realizes she has absolutely nothing. Her entire identity, her wealth, her status in Atlanta is entirely dependent on the man currently hyperventilating against a luggage cart. My father Roland finally finds his voice. He steps forward, attempting to summon the booming patriarchal authority he used to silence me at Thanksgiving dinner. Chloe, this is unacceptable. Roland attempts, though, his voice waver noticeably. If you are in this position of power, you should have informed your family. We are your blood. You let us look foolish. You let Preston make a mistake last night without warning him. You set us up. I turn my icy gaze to Roland, shutting down his pathetic attempt to regain control. I did not set you up, Roland. I simply stopped preventing your collapse, I state, projecting my voice so every executive in the lobby hears the absolute boundary I am drawing. You walked into my house yesterday morning and ordered me to stay hidden in the kitchen because you said I smelled like garlic in desperation. You told me to be useful to a man whose entire livelihood I hold in the palm of my hand. I owe you 0 explanations and 0 warnings. You humiliated yourselves. Preston pushes off the luggage cart. The sheer terror of losing everything forces his survival instincts into overdrive. He abandons his pride completely. The arrogant, condescending vice president who snapped his fingers at me for a bourbon refill is dead. In his place is a desperate, graveling shell of a man. Chloe. Preston begs, his voice trembling so violently he can barely form the words. He takes a staggering step toward me, his hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. Chloe, please? I did not know. I swear to God, I did not know. If I had known you were apex zenith, I would never have asked you to handle my dry cleaning. I would never have blamed the dinner on you. Please. You have to understand the pressure for this promotion has been destroying me. I was just stressed. You cannot hold this against me. We are family. The sheer hypocrisy of his plea is nauseating. He is only apologizing because he realized my net worth. He is only begging because I hold his paycheck. If I were truly just a caterer, he would have gladly let me burn to save his own skin. He did not regret his cruelty. He only regretted his target. You are only sorry because you are speaking to the chairwoman, I reply, my voice dropping to a low lethal register. If I were the maid you thought I was, you would have gladly destroyed my life to save your own ego. You showed me exactly who you are, Preston. You showed Sterling exactly who you are. I look at Sterling. Sterling nods in agreement, his disgust for Preston radiating off him in waves. An executive who abuses the people he believes are beneath him will inevitably abuse the company's resources. I state, clearly delivering the absolute truth of the corporate world. You do not possess the character, the composure, or the basic human decency required to operate within my firm. The entire lobby watches as the reality of my words settles over Preston. He is trapped in a nightmare of his own making, surrounded by the very executives he desperately wanted to impress, all of them, currently witnessing his ultimate degradation. I let that degradation seep into his bones for a few more agonizing seconds. I want him to feel the exact measure of powerlessness he tried to force onto me in my own kitchen. I look Preston dead in the eye. The ambient noise of the luxury resort seems to fade into absolute silence, leaving only the heavy weight of my authority pressing down on his chest. And since I expect accountability from my leadership, I say, my voice dropping to a low, steady cadence that echoes with terrifying finality. As of this exact moment, you are fired. The physical reaction is instantaneous. Preston does not just stumble, he completely deflates. The expensive golf polo he wore to impress his CEO suddenly looks like a cheap rag clinging to a broken man. His knees buckle beneath him and he drops straight down onto the polished marble floor of the lobby. A grown man, a former vice president, weeping in the center of an elite corporate summit. He clutches his chest, gasping for air as a full-blown panic attack takes hold. He realizes the multi-million-dollar deals he was banking on, the bonuses, the country club dues. The entire facade of his arrogant existence are instantly vaporized. Chloe, you cannot do this. Preston gasps, his voice trembling so violently he can barely form the words. My mortgage, the car payments. We just put a massive down payment on the vacation home in Aspen. You are ruining my life over one dinner. I am not ruining your life, Preston. I correct him smoothly, looking down at him with absolute 0 empathy. I am simply refusing to finance your incompetence. You ruined your own life the second you decided your ego was more important than your character. You thought you could treat a black woman like a servant, snap your fingers in her face, and still collect a massive paycheck from her firm. You severely miscalculated. Beside him, Jada shatters. The golden child facade dissolves into a messy, hysterical reality. She lets out a sound that is not a sad cry, but a terrified shriek of a woman who just realized her platinum credit cards are about to be declined. She drops to her knees next to her husband, her designer handbag completely forgotten on the floor. She reaches out, her hands shaking, and grabs the hem of my white trousers. Chloe, please. Jada begs, tears streaming down her face, ruining her flawless makeup. You are my sister. You cannot take his job. If he loses this promotion, we lose everything. We will be a laughingstock in Atlanta. You have to give him another chance. You have to fix this. I looked down at my sister, the woman who stood in my kitchen and demanded I wipe the grease off her plates, the woman who smirked when our parents treated me like an outsider because I did not fit their shallow mold of success. You should have thought about your lifestyle before you married a man who blames the help for his own failures. I tell her, my voice devoid of any sisterly affection. You wanted to be the wife of a powerful executive, Jada, but you married a coward, and I do not keep cowards on my payroll. Preston looks up at Sterling, desperate for a lifeline. He crawls forward slightly, his hand slipping on the marble. Sterling, sir, please. Preston pleads, his voice cracking with desperation. You know my portfolio. You know my profit margins. You know what I bring to the firm. You cannot let her do this to me. Sterling does not even blink. He looks down at Preston with absolute icy disgust. Miss Anderson is the chairwoman. Sterling states, his voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a lethal sentence. Her word is the absolute law of apex zenith. Furthermore, I entirely agree with her assessment. Your termination is effective immediately. Sterling turns to one of his managing directors standing nearby. Contact Human Resources. Sterling instructs crisp and professional cancel his executive severance package. He violated the morality and conduct clause by publicly degrading a superior. Preston's eyes bug out of his head. A superior? He chokes out his brain, completely failing to comprehend the magnitude of his mistake. Yes, I say, leaning down slightly so he hears every single syllable perfectly. Me. Every time you mocked me at Sunday dinner, every time you treated me like the hired help, you were openly harassing the majority shareholder of your company. Preston lets out a guttural sob, burying his face in his hands. The absolute finality of the situation crushes his last remaining hope. He turns his head and looks frantically at my father, Roland. Roland, tell her. Preston pleads, his voice cracking. Tell your daughter to stop this. Tell her we are family. She has to listen to you. This is the moment of ultimate revelation. For years, Roland worshipped Preston. He commanded me to serve Preston quietly. He viewed this white corporate executive as the ultimate prize, the golden ticket to elevating our family's status. But now, looking at a terminated, unemployed man groveling on the floor, Roland does exactly what he has always done when things get difficult or embarrassing. He protects his own image. My father takes a slow, deliberate step backward, putting physical distance between himself and his disgraced son-in-law. He refuses to meet Preston's eyes. He looks away entirely, abandoning the man he once called the legacy of our family. Roland will not risk angering the billionaire CEO standing in front of him, and he certainly will not risk angering the daughter who just revealed she holds more power than anyone in the room. I smile a cold, satisfied smile. Look at that, Preston, I say softly, ensuring he witnesses the exact moment his value expires. The moment you lose your status, you lose his respect. You are no longer useful to him. Welcome to my world. Jada wails louder, clutching her husband's arm, her sobs echoing off the high ceilings. Vivian stands completely paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing silently as she watches her perfect social standing evaporate into thin air. They came here to drag me back to my place, to force me back into the kitchen where they believed I belonged. Instead, they found themselves completely stripped of their dignity, their wealth, and their illusions. They are kneeling on the floor of my resort, surrounded by my executives, drowning in the consequences of their own toxic arrogance. I watched Vivian snap out of her paralysis. The absolute destruction of Preston had rewired her survival instincts in real time. She looked at the man groveling on the floor, the white executive she had treated like a deity, and realized he was entirely worthless to her now. His status was gone. His money was gone. His usefulness to her social climbing had completely evaporated. So she did what a cornered narcissist always does. She pivoted. Vivian turned her gaze away from the wreckage of her golden child's marriage and locked eyes with me. The sheer audacity of her transformation was almost a medical marvel. The harsh, condescending scowl she had worn since she stepped out of the rental car vanished. In its place, a sickeningly sweet, artificially warm smile stretched across her face. She smoothed down the front of her wrinkled designer dress, stepped over Preston's legs, and rushed toward me with her arms outstretched. "Chloe, baby," Vivian cried out, her voice dripping with a clawing manufactured affection that made my skin crawl. "Oh, my beautiful girl. We had no idea. We are family. We always knew you were special. We always knew you were destined for greatness. We are so incredibly proud of you. She actually tried to embrace me. She actually thought she could erase 35 years of emotional abuse, comparison, and blatant disrespect with a single hug, just because she discovered my net worth. She believed her title as my mother granted her an all-access pass to my empire. I did not step back. I simply raised my right hand and held it up, stopping her dead in her tracks just inches from my white blazer. I am not your baby, I stated, my voice ringing with a cold, lethal authority that echoed off the marble pillars. I am the maid you tried to force into the kitchen. I am the disappointment you tried to hide, so you could secure a promotion for a man who is currently weeping on my floor. You do not get to claim my success when you spent my entire life betting on my failure. Vivian's artificial smile shattered. Her hand dropped to her side. The reality of her absolute rejection finally registered in her eyes. I did not give her the opportunity to formulate another lie or shed another fake tear. I looked past her and gave a single sharp nod to my head of security. David, I commanded, my voice unwavering. Security, escort these unauthorized individuals off my property immediately. If they resist, involve local law enforcement. Yes, Boss David replied, signaling his team. 6 highly trained security professionals moved in instantly. They did not ask politely. They operated with the swift, uncompromising efficiency of a luxury resort, protecting its highest value asset. 2 guards lifted Preston by his armpits, dragging him up from the marble floor. He was entirely limp, babbling incoherently about his mortgage and his corporate access card. Jada shrieked wildly, grabbing at Preston's ruined polo shirt, sobbing that her life was over. Roland did not even put up a fight. He lowered his head, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat, and allowed a guard to guide him toward the exit. Vivian, however, went out exactly as I expected. She fought, she screamed. She thrashed against the security guard, who firmly gripped her arm, her Southern Belle facade completely destroyed. She shouted that she was my mother, that I would burn in hell for this disrespect, that she would sue me for everything I owned. Her shrill voice bounced off the crystal chandeliers, a frantic, chaotic noise that grew fainter and fainter as she was dragged backward across the expansive lobby. I did not watch them leave. I turned my back on them completely, severing the toxic tether that had bound me to their approval for 3.5 decades. I extended my arm, and Sterling Pierce, the billionaire CEO who valued execution above all else, offered a respectful nod. "Shall we begin the summit, boss?" Sterling asked, his tone perfectly calm, as if a family had not just been forcibly removed from the premises. "We shall," I replied. We walked side by side through the heavy mahogany doors into the executive conference wing. The doors sealed shut behind us, blocking out the final muffled screams of my mother. The boardroom was quiet, focused, and filled with professionals who respected my vision, my capital, and my leadership. I took my seat at the head of the massive glass table, opened my portfolio, and got to work. 6 months have passed since that morning in Palm Beach. Time has a beautiful way of letting gravity do its job, and the heavy consequences of my family's actions pulled them straight down to the bottom. Preston's termination was the catastrophic end of his career in finance. Apex Zenith's complete takeover of his firm meant his firing was public knowledge within private equity circles. Furthermore, the morality and conduct violation on his record ensured he was entirely unhireable. No respectable corporate entity wanted a vice president who publicly degraded women or blamed his staff for his own incompetence. Without his massive salary, the luxury cars were repossessed, and the vacation home in Aspen went into immediate foreclosure. Jada completely vanished from the public eye. Her entire identity was wrapped up in being the wealthy, successful wife of an elite executive. When the money dried up, her perfectly curated social media accounts went dark. There were no more posts about designer hauls, no more pictures of country club brunches, no more bragging about her flawless life. She was forced to face the harsh reality of living on a budget. She had spent her whole life mocking. The fallout for my parents was arguably the most poetic. Atlanta high society is incredibly small and fiercely protective of its image. The truth about what happened at the Opal Reserve Resort did not stay in Florida. Wealthy circles talk, and the gossip spread like wildfire through their church groups and their exclusive country club. Everyone learned that Vivian and Roland had treated their self-made billionaire daughter like a servant to impress a white executive who ended up getting fired by that very same daughter. The sheer embarrassment was terminal. They were quietly phased out of their social committees. Dinner invitations ceased. They became social paras in the very community they had sacrificed my mental health to impress. I am sitting on the upper deck of the Zenith, my super yacht anchored in the clear turquoise waters off the coast of the Bahamas. The sun is setting, casting a brilliant golden glow over the ocean. I have a chilled glass of champagne in my hand and a multi-billion-dollar portfolio that continues to grow every single quarter. I do not miss them. I do not feel an ounce of guilt. I spent years contorting myself to fit into a space they deliberately made too small for me. I spent years swallowing their insults, accepting their scraps, and believing their lie that I was not enough. They taught me a very painful but necessary lesson about the reality of human nature. They taught me that proximity does not equal loyalty. I took a deep breath of the warm, salty air, leaning back against the plush cushions. I am surrounded by a team that honors my vision, friends who celebrate my authenticity, and a life that I built entirely on my own terms. Blood makes you related, but respect makes you family. And I only share my table with family. The most profound lesson here is that your worth is never defined by people committed to underestimating you. Instead of begging for a seat at her family's toxic table, Chloe silently built her own empire. True power doesn't need to shout, argue, or seek validation from abusers. When you walk away from conditional love and focus on authentic growth, karma has a poetic way of exposing the frauds. Remember, blood only makes you related, but consistent respect is what makes you family. Never shrink yourself to fit into spaces you have already outgrown. Build your own table instead. Have you ever had to cut off toxic relatives to protect your peace and build your own empire? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to smash that like and subscribe button.